All right, everybody, here's this week's packet. I probably in the future will have one of these videos posted by Monday morning when the packets come out, just kind of a little walkthrough in case some things are a little bit confusing. Now, the reading and writing parts of this week, the ELA stuff, isn't too bad, so I'm not going to really spend any time on that. It's mostly read and get the answers. However, these fractions can get a little bit tricky sometimes, and if this was the normal school year, we would be about a week or so away from getting into this. Although we have talked about fractions a little bit, there are a couple of things I want to go over before we dive headlong into this. This whole packet is pretty much about comparing fractions, right? Comparing fractions, which one's greater, which one's less. But before I do that, I usually there are 3 tips that I like to have everybody have in their mind when they're staring at a sheet of fractions to compare. And so I don't have my math journal here with me, but I've got this guy I've been doing my plant stuff in. I'm going to write down a couple of these tips here. So if you want to grab your journals, this is going to be the good time to write these down. Here are the 3 big tips to use. So here's one. If the bottom numbers are the same, now I know the real official term for this is denominator is the bottom number of a fraction, but for the sake of this, we'll just talk about bottom numbers and top numbers. So numerators and denominators, bottom numbers and top. If the bottom numbers are the same, the larger top number is the larger fraction. If the bottom numbers are the same, then the larger top number is the larger fraction. All right, and here's your example. This is the easier one because we kind of already know this, right? So if I've got 2 pizzas and they're both cut into fourths, and I eat one of these pieces, then I've eaten 1 out of the 4. I've eaten 1/4. Okay, if I've eaten 3 of these pieces, then I've eaten 3 out of the 4. So here we have, if the bottom numbers are the same, they're both cut into fourths, right? Then the larger top number, 3 is bigger than 1, is the larger fraction. He's the winner. Okay, and again, this is something that's kind of intuitive. We already kind of know this one, but that's rule number 1. So when you're scanning a page of fractions that you're trying to compare, I always start by looking at the bottom number. If they're the same, it gets real easy. All right, here's the next one. And this one's going to seem kind of backwards. If the top numbers are the same, the smaller bottom number is the larger fraction. Don't know why I didn't write on the lines for that one. That's annoying. If the top numbers are the same, the smaller bottom number is the larger fraction. Well, let me give you an example of that. If I have my 2 pizzas, and this one is cut into thirds, and this one is cut into sixths. Still the same amount of pizza, right? The pizzas haven't gotten bigger or smaller, and we have to kind of think about that when we talk about fractions. We're always talking about the same size whole, okay? And if I have the top number's the same. So if I have one slice of this, then I have 1/3. And if I have one slice of this, then I've got 1/6. So in this case, if the top numbers are the same, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, the lower the bottom number, right? That's the smaller, less number of pieces you've just cut it into. That means each one of these pieces is going to be bigger, right? So in this case, if the top numbers are the same, if this was 2/3 and 2/6, the lower bottom number then wins, okay? It seems backwards. If the top numbers are the same, the bigger, or if the bottom numbers are the same, the bigger top number is bigger. If the top numbers are the same, the smaller bottom number means more stuff. Whew, okay. Last tip. Is either fraction more or less than a half? Okay, this is the next question to ask yourself when you come across a fraction page. This one right here that'll save you lots of time. Okay, and this is kind of what the packet's talking about when it says compare fractions using benchmarks. A benchmark just means I know something, and how does this new fraction relate to what I already know? So the benchmark, the easiest benchmark to talk about is 1/2. Okay, that means 1 out of 2. Scoop my camera just a little. So that could be, I'm going to make a series of circles here. And hopefully they'll all be about the same size. Okay, so if I take this, now I've got myself 1/2. Easy enough, right? Now let's say I take that same pizza, cut it into 4 pieces. I want to shade in the same amount of area, and so I'm going to shade in all this stuff over here, right? So this one is the exact same amount of pizza, except this was cut into double the pieces. So this one is 2 out of 4 pieces. You can see where this is headed now, probably. I have the same pizza, but now I'm going to cut it into 8 pieces. And I'm still going to shade in the same amount of pizza, which is everything on this side, right? So I still haven't, if I eat this much and I eat this much, I'm eating the same amount. This is just a bunch of small pieces. This is one big slab, right? This is 1, 2, 3, 4 out of the 8 pieces. And then just for the heck of it, we'll do one more. So this is 8. And now we'll get silly and do 16ths. Cut all these ones in half. Oh yeah, that's looking good. So now I've got 16 pieces, so I'll cut this in half. Again, I'm eating the same amount of pieces, or the same amount of pizza, but way more pieces. And so if I double it, you notice it's going 2, 4, 8. It's doubling each time. So this would be out of 16 pieces. Now I've eaten 8 of them. So once you get the concept of what 1/2 is, it's really just what is half of the bottom number. Okay, without drawing it, I could tell you that half of 100 would be 50. It's another way to say 1/2, right? Or if I had 30, it would be 15/30. Now here's where it gets a little tricky. These are nice, easy to use, even numbers. If I have odd numbers, it makes it tougher, right? If I have that same pizza and now I've cut it into thirds, getting half of that is tricky, right? If I still color in the same amount, then I'm kind of getting 1 and it's like 1.5 over 3, which doesn't really even jibe with fraction law. And so we just know that half of 3 is like 1.5. So you're not going to be able to land right on half, but what you can do is 1/3 is less than that, and 2/3 is more than that, right? Half of it's somewhere in between there because it's 1 1/2. So when you have the odd numbers, you have to kind of figure out what the odd number half would be, and you're not going to be able to do that by drawing them out. Okay, there's one more tip, but we won't get to that last tip later. So the 3 tips are, if the bottom numbers are the same, the bigger the top number, the bigger the fraction. Okay. If the top numbers are the same, the smaller the bottom number, the bigger the fraction, because the pieces are going to be bigger. 1 out of 3 pieces is better than 1 out of 6 pieces. And then finally, this one's probably going to help you out the most. If you kind of know what half is for any of these bottom numbers, then it makes it easier to compare. That's kind of using a benchmark. Okay. So then on to this packet. The top part of this packet is, this is kind of review for us, right? We're comparing these fractions just like I did, and it's having you color them in, and then it shows you to color them in down here, and then down here they give you this handy bar so you can see, well, look, yeah, 2/8 is way smaller than 3/4, and so 2/8 will have the open mouth towards it. Open mouth means bigger. And then it jumps right into this. It doesn't give you space to draw stuff out. It doesn't do any of that stuff. So let's see if any of our tips or tricks will work for this one. First one is, bottom number's the same. 4 and a 10, nope, that won't work. All right, second tip, top number's the same. 1 and an 8, nope, strike 2. Last tip, 1/2. All right, so 1/4, to be a half, it would have to be a 2 up top, right? And so this one is less than a half. How about this guy? If there's a 10 on the bottom, what would it have to be on top to be exactly half? It has to be a 5, right? So 8's bigger than 5. So this number is bigger than a half, and this number is smaller than a half. So I know 8/10 is the larger fraction. All right, how about this one? 1/3. We just talked about thirds, and we talked about how to be exactly half of 3, you have to have 1 1/2. So this is smaller than 1/2. And 7/8, half of 8 is 4. 7's bigger than that, so we know that 7/8 is bigger. All right. I'm not going to do all of these for you. I'll do a couple with you, but I do notice, I noticed this. Check it out. Top numbers are the same. That's one of our tricks. If the top numbers are the same, then what happens? Who's bigger? Is it the 6 or the 8? So take a look at that one. Now, I think the rest of these tips, the rest of these ones on this page will be answered with our 3 tips. I'm going to flip the page. Now, it's just more of the same, okay? There are a couple on here, or at least on the last page, that really you can't solve by using just the tips we gave, okay? But I do see a couple here. I see same top numbers, that's the trick we used. I see same top numbers, that's the same trick we used. I see ones that are exactly 1/2, right? And then I see a lot that are going to solve the problem of bigger than 1/2 or smaller than 1/2. Like I said, that gets you out of most of your fraction comparing stuff. Take a look at number 13 on this next page. Bottom number's the same? No. Top number's the same? No. Bigger than half? Yep. Bigger than half? Yep. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. Now, there is one surefire way to solve these for real, and next week I'll get you into the math behind that one. But for this one, you might actually, you want to try to draw a bar for it or something like that, you can try it out and see. I will give you a hint, though. This is a very, very close fraction, and if you're relying on your drawing abilities, you might be fooled. Especially because trying to draw fifths is tough. Okay, to draw 6 is a little bit easier because I can kind of eyeball my thirds, and then I can cut those thirds in half, and I get 6, right? But to do fifths, there's no way to cut it. So I'm just going to, let's see, it's going to be a little bit bigger than that. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. See, this is where it gets tricky when you try to draw, because this piece here isn't quite as big as these ones I started out with. So 5 out of 6, you'd color all the way down here. And 4 out of 5, you'd color all the way down here. And now you're looking at just barely if I move this line from side to side. It's tricky. So there are going to be a couple of these that are tricky, but most of them with our tips you can solve. This guy here, we know this one is probably the bigger one because he's 8 out of 8, which is the same thing as one whole thing. I ate all 8 of the 8 pieces of the pizza. This is eating less than the pizza. So 13 and 14 might be your biggest trick. I'm curious to see what you guys come up with, and then I'll go over those later on in the week and see. And I think there's 2 more pages of this, but it's more of the same. It's more of the same. Again, you'll go through here, you'll see that they've got this graph up top to be colored in, and then down here again, compare 1/2 and 1/4, and then 2/3 and 3/6, right? But then you're just back to 1/2 or 3/4, 6/12 or 5/8. And this time they're also putting the equal sign in here too, so you might come across some that mean the same amount. And so this is a little bit trickier one, and I'll talk about this next week as we go over the packet. This one right here, a little tricky. This one's right here is going to be a little bit tricky. I'll flip to the last page. Now this whole chunk right in here, this is what I'll get into next week a little bit more. They jump so fast from comparing fractions into finding common denominators. That's a whole other lesson. I'll teach that one next week, to find common denominators. And that once you find common denominators, you can get these ones solved without having to draw pictures and stuff. Like I said, most of the problems on these pages we can solve using those 3 tips. And the ones you can't, I'll go over some of those next week as well. So double check to make sure there's no, oh, there's another one. This one is writing fractions as sums. And we talk about sums, that means adding together. Write fractions as a sum of unit fractions. Don't be scared of this term here. It is a new term, and by new I mean we've started using it the past 3 or 4 years. Unit fractions just means any fraction with a 1 on top. Any fraction with a 1 on top. So 1/8 is a unit fraction. 1/30 is a unit fraction. All right, it's a new term. So what they're saying is that this is easier than it looks for sure. So 3/6 is, to make 3/6 using unit fractions, I would do 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6. Because then I get 1, 2, 3/6 when I'm all done. And so you can probably get these. 2/4 is going to be 1/4 plus, you get it, 4/8, 5/5. Okay, that's using unit fractions. Now it's going to take you one step further on the next page. It says, write the fraction as a sum of unit fractions. And so in this case, I've got 3/8. That would be 1/8 plus 1/8 plus 1/8. It's just that simple. 3 of those. 3 1/8 make 3/8. And then down here it says 6/12 and 4/4. Now, this last one is slightly different. They want from me here. Write the fraction as a sum of fractions 3 different ways. And so you can use one way, would be your unit fractions. I could do 1/10 plus 1/10 plus 1/10 plus 1/10 plus, I could do that the whole way through. Or I could find 2 numbers that when I add them together make 7. So for instance, I might do 3/10 plus 4/10. It wants me to do it in 3 different ways. So now I might do 1/10 plus 6/10. You get the picture. Same thing for 6/6. Find 3 different ways you can add fractions together to make 6/6. You'll notice the bottom numbers, the denominator is going to stay the same the whole way through when you're adding. Let me just one more double check to make sure we're no more math. This is a math game you can play, but I won't go over that math game right now. Okay, I hope that little bit of a packet review helped out a bit. And like I said, as soon as I get the packets this week, for next week, I'll make this video, and I'll have this video up, kind of a packet walkthrough, hopefully on Monday when the packets are available. Hey, thank you.